She was once a brilliant engineering student, until jealousy and lies destroyed her future, leaving her homeless under a bridge. But when fate put her in the path of a billionaire facing the biggest crisis of his life, everything changed. Watch closely, because this is more than just a story. It's proof that even at your lowest, destiny can find you. Stay with us till the end. The night had been long and restless. The roar of trailers on the expressway above her head never stopped, and the cold cement pressed into her back. Mabel Johnson lay awake under the bridge, staring at the underside of the flyover where old posters curled and peeled. She was young, only 24, beautiful in a way hardship could not erase, though hunger had left her cheeks hollow and her skin dry. Beside her lay a torn nylon bag. It was small, almost empty. Inside were the only things she had refused to lose: an old engineering textbook with scribbles on the margins, a thin certificate sleeve folded and creased, and a simple blue pen whose ink had begun to fade. She guarded them the way a mother guards a child. Every morning when she woke, she pressed the book to her chest, whispering to herself, "One day, it will all be over." Mabel had once dreamed of building machines that touched the sky. She had been one of the brightest students at her university, carrying her scholarship with pride. Professors admired her, and classmates came to her for help. She walked the campus with confidence, her eyes full of hope. But all of that had been stolen. It happened in her final year. Her classmate, Clara Williams, came from money. Everyone knew Clara's father, a well-known politician, was a powerful donor to the university, and Clara walked around like the school belonged to her. She had never liked Mabel. Clara envied the way professors praised her, the way Mabel's brilliance shone brighter than her own. One exam week, whispers spread through the faculty like smoke. Someone had been caught stealing answer sheets. Someone had been caught hiding cheat papers in their bag. Clara had arranged it all, slipping papers into Mabel's bag, setting her up for humiliation. When the lecturers called Mabel in, her heart raced. They searched her bag. The papers fell out like a curse. Mabel begged. She cried. She explained that she had never touched them, but the panel's faces were cold. The scholarship board revoked her funding that very day. "We cannot allow indiscipline from a scholarship student," they declared. "She is expelled." Mabel went home in tears, clutching her bag with the book inside as if it could protect her. She lived then with her aunt, the woman who had raised her since she was 13, after her parents died in a tragic accident. Mabel thought her aunt would comfort her, would at least listen. But when she told her story, her aunt's face hardened. "Do you know the shame you've brought on this family?" she spat. "You were lucky to get that scholarship and you wasted it with disgrace. Auntie, please, I didn't do it. I was framed. Clara set me up. Please believe me." But her aunt was unmoved. She opened the door and pointed outside. "Leave my house. Now. I will not feed a thief. I was hoping you would amount to something, but now I know better." That night, Mabel found herself on the street with nothing but her nylon bag. She knocked on no one's door. She had no one left. It had been over a year now. She slept under the bridge, sometimes on cardboard, sometimes on bare cement. She begged for water. She searched for scraps to eat. She endured insults, people passing by who clutched their bags tighter when they saw her, teenagers who threw stones for fun, and men who offered wicked things in exchange for a meal. Through it all, she never let go of the bag. When the nights were cold, she pressed the book to her heart and whispered, "One day, it will all be over." Her stomach growled now as the city began to wake. Buses honked, hawkers called, "Pure water! Gala!" The air smelled of dust, exhaust, and roasted ground nuts. Mabel pulled her shawl tighter, rubbed her sore legs, and looked out at the skyline. Tall buildings rose in the distance, their glass walls catching the morning light. Among them stood one tower more polished than the rest. It bore the name Eagle Tech Aerospace. Mabel had passed it many times. She would slow her steps just to look at it, the way a hungry person lingers outside a bakery. Inside, she knew, people like her once were bright, confident, respected. Inside, machines were built, problems solved, the sky touched. Her eyes lingered on it now. Her heart ached. She whispered under her breath, "One day." Tomorrow would not be like other days. Tomorrow came faster than expected, and the city woke louder than ever. The same sun that touched the broken cardboard under the bridge also poured its light on the tall glass walls of EagleTech Aerospace. Inside those walls, men in suits and women in sharp skirts moved quickly, their shoes clicking against marble floors. Their faces were tense, their whispers sharp. The air smelled of coffee and stress. On the top floor, in the largest boardroom, billionaire Richard Adams stood with his hands pressed hard against the long table. He was young, in his late 20s, handsome, always dressed with quiet authority. But today his eyes were shadowed, his jaw was tight. Across from him, a dozen engineers sat with laptops open, papers scattered, graphs and charts glowing on the screen behind them. None of it looked good. "We've been on this problem for months," Richard said, his voice heavy, filling the room. He lifted his hand and slammed it down on the table. The sound made even the air conditioner seem to pause. "And no one has given me a solution, not one." Silence stretched across the room. Heads lowered. Some tapped pens nervously. Others avoided his eyes. Richard pointed toward the whiteboard covered in formulas and sketches of engines. "A critical fault in our propulsion system. One error and an aircraft can fall from the sky. Do you understand what that means?" His voice rose, sharp now. "Lives, reputation, and billions of dollars." He looked around the room, his chest rising and falling. "We are about to lose the biggest contract in EagleTech's history. If this fault is not fixed today, we don't just lose the contract. We lose investor confidence. Our shares will crash. Our competitors will eat us alive. Do you want to be remembered as the team that destroyed this company?" No one answered. A senior engineer coughed into his fist. "Sir, we've run all the simulations." "And you've all failed," Richard cut in. "Every single time." His eyes were burning now, though his voice had dropped low. "I gave you 48 hours. That was 2 days ago. Today is the deadline. This afternoon I must deliver an answer to the board, and right now," he paused, leaning on the table with both hands, "we have nothing." He straightened slowly. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector. His next words dropped heavy. "If we fail again," he said, "we lose everything." He stepped back, his face hard, and with a wave of his hand dismissed them. "Go." The engineers gathered their files, their chairs scraping softly against the floor. No one dared to meet his eyes. They left in small groups, whispering in hushed tones as they filed into the hallway. Some muttered about impossible deadlines. Others exchanged bitter words under their breath. The sound faded until only Richard remained. He sank into his chair, pulled at his tie, and stared at the city skyline beyond the glass wall. Tall buildings stood proud. Cars crawled along the roads below. But for him, all of it felt fragile. Like one wrong breath could bring it crashing down. He pressed a hand to his forehead. "What am I missing?" he whispered. Outside the boardroom, the whispers continued, winding down the corridors of EagleTech. Engineers shook their heads, some pale with fear, some bitter with frustration. Nobody wanted to be in Richard Adams' shoes that day. But destiny had a strange way of writing stories. While the richest man in the room fought to keep his empire from collapsing, under the shadow of the bridge, a young woman with dust on her clothes and hunger in her belly was holding the key that could change everything. Not so far away, the midday sun beat hard on Lagos, turning the bridge above Mabel's head into a furnace of steel and dust. Her stomach ached with emptiness. She had eaten nothing since yesterday morning, just a half loaf of bread someone had thrown away. Her throat was dry, her legs heavy, but still she walked. Something pulled her, slow and steady, toward the city's tall glass towers. As she reached Victoria Island, her eyes once again caught the shining building that always made her stop. EagleTech Aerospace. She paused across the road, staring. It was busier than usual. Cars rolled up quickly, security men barked into radios, executives in suits moved in and out with restless steps. Mabel's heart tightened. She felt out of place in her torn clothes, her slippers almost worn flat. Yet something stronger than shame tugged at her feet. Her hunger told her maybe there was food inside, but curiosity told her there was something more. She clutched her nylon bag close, crossed the road carefully, and stepped toward the glass doors. The lobby was vast, cool with air conditioning. Mabel felt the chill run over her dusty arms. She shrank to the side, trying not to be noticed, but voices floated to her from a group of executives walking past. "Less than an hour left," one whispered urgently. Shares will drop by evening. Another muttered, "If we don't fix this engine fault today, everything is gone." Mabel's head lifted. Engine fault. The words clung to her ears like magnets. She froze, listening harder. She had read about such problems in her textbook, the one she guarded like life itself. She pieced the whispers together, the system reacting wrongly, engines failing under vibration, contracts at risk. Her mind, rusty but alive, began to draw lines. Numbers swam back to her memory. She gripped the bag tighter. Her feet moved without her planning it. Down the hall, she saw engineers filing back toward the big boardroom. Their faces were pale, their steps hurried. She followed quietly, her heart beating in her throat. The door to the boardroom opened. Mabel slipped in behind them before it closed. Inside, the room was tense again. Engineers shuffled to their seats, laptops glowing with formulas. Richard Adams stood at the head of the table, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. The walls of glass made the city outside seem close, but no one looked at it. Mabel stood near the corner, almost shaking. For a moment, she thought she should leave. Then her eyes fell on the whiteboard. The angry lines, the arrows, the circles, they all screamed the same mistake to her. She knew it. She had seen it before in theory. Her lips parted. "I can fix this." Before she could move, a guard spotted her. "Hey, you, out!" The man strode toward her, hand already stretching to grab her arm. Everyone turned. The room froze, but Richard lifted his hand. "Wait!" The guard stopped, confused. Richard's eyes narrowed on Mabel. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Her knees shook, but her voice found its way out. Soft, shy, but steady. I can solve it." The room erupted. Engineers burst into laughter. One slapped the table, another shook his head in disbelief. "Solve it?" Someone scoffed. "Look at her clothes," another chuckled cruelly. "Maybe she came to fix the toilets." The laughter grew louder, filling the room. Mabel's face burned, but she did not step back. She hugged her bag tighter, her eyes on the board. Her lips trembled, but her voice, though low, carried again. "I can solve it." Richard raised a hand. The laughter died slowly, leaving only uneasy silence. His eyes, tired and desperate, studied the young woman standing with dust on her skin and fire in her eyes. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "we've been looking in the wrong place." He straightened. "Let her try." The engineers stared at him in shock, but none dared to protest. Richard's sharp gaze silenced them all. Mabel stepped forward slowly, every pair of eyes burning into her back. She reached the whiteboard, her fingers brushing the marker on the tray. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The guards shifted uneasily. The engineers exchanged smirks, rolling their eyes, but Richard's voice cut through the room. "Show us." Mabel turned to the board. She breathed in. Then, for the first time in years, she began to write. The projector glowed across the boardroom, washing the walls in pale light. Lines of code scrolled on the laptops as the engineers worked quickly, their fingers tapping nervously. Every face was tight, every eye darted between numbers and screens. At the back of the room, Mabel stood holding her torn bag close, her nails digging into the strap. She whispered to herself, "Please, let it work." "Simulation ready," the senior engineer said at last, his voice thin. Richard Adams stepped closer to the screen, his fists clenched at his sides. "Run it." The digital runway appeared, stretching into the gray of a simulated sky. A model plane rolled forward, engines roaring. Numbers danced at the bottom of the screen: speed, altitude, angle of attack. For the first few seconds, everything looked steady. Then came the turbulence. The digital plane shook violently, the same scenario that had broken their system again and again. Red warnings began to flicker at the corners of the screen. A wave of dread passed through the room. One engineer muttered under his breath, "Not again." Another buried his face in his hands. Mabel's breath caught. Her eyes widened. Her chest rose and fell quickly, but she looked confident, like she was sure it would work. Then it happened. The graph that always spiked like a scream steadied. The jagged red lines began to smooth into calm curves. The warnings faded one by one. The autopilot didn't panic this time. It listened. It checked the helper sensors. It filtered the noise. It gave control back to the pilot early. The digital plane leveled. The numbers turned green. On the right side of the screen, The result box blinked once, twice, and then flashed bold and bright. Success. For a moment the room was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the silence broke. A gasp, a shout, and suddenly the room erupted into cheers. Engineers jumped to their feet, hands clapped against tables. Some laughed in disbelief, others covered their mouths as if they had just witnessed a miracle. "She did it!" one voice cried. "It worked! My God, it worked!" Richard stood frozen, his eyes locked on the green letters. He had been prepared for failure, for another crushing blow, for the slow death of his company. But now hope filled his chest like air after drowning. He turned to Mabel. The young woman stood by the wall, eyes wide, tears trembling on her lashes. She looked too stunned to smile, too shocked to move. Richard's lips parted. For the first time all week, a true smile broke across his face. "You," he whispered, almost to himself, then louder. "You saved us." The applause thundered louder, but Mabel barely heard it. Her knees were weak, her heart racing. For months she had been invisible, ignored, mocked, and now a room full of brilliant engineers was clapping for her. The applause still echoed in the boardroom when Richard Adams lifted his hand. The noise slowly died, though the energy in the air remained charged, alive. His sharp eyes never left Mabel. "Enough," he said firmly. Then softer, directed only at her. "Come with me." He didn't wait for an answer. He simply turned and walked toward the door. The guards stepped aside as Mabel, clutching her torn bag, followed timidly behind him. Her legs trembled as she walked through the wide glass hallways of Eagle Tech, past polished floors and expensive art on the walls. People turned to stare at her dusty clothes, her rough slippers, her frightened eyes. But Richard kept walking until they entered his office. It was a grand space, glass walls opening to the skyline, shelves lined with books and awards, a wide desk with papers neatly stacked. Yet for Mabel it felt too clean, too far from the world she had lived in. She stopped just inside the doorway, hugging her bag as though it were armor. Richard gestured toward a chair. "Sit." She hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself onto the soft leather. It felt so foreign that tears almost sprang to her eyes. Richard leaned on the edge of his desk, arms folded. He studied her in silence for a long moment. Then his voice, steady but gentle, filled the air. "Who are you? Are you a renowned engineer in disguise or something?" Mabel swallowed. Her lips trembled. "My name is Mabel Johnson. How did you know so much about that engine?" His gaze was sharp but not unkind. "My best engineers couldn't see what you just showed us. Where did it come from?" Mabel looked down at her lap, fingers twisting the torn strap of her bag. She hesitated, then slowly pulled out the old engineering textbook, its corners bent, its pages yellowed. She placed it gently on her knees, stroking the cover with care. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I used to be a student, a good one. Engineering was my whole world. Numbers made sense to me when nothing else did. I dreamed of building things that could fly, things that could carry hope." She paused, choking back a sob. "But someone destroyed me." Her hands shook as she held the book tighter. "I was accused of stealing, of cheating. Lies were planted to ruin me. I was in my final year. I begged them to believe me. I begged my family to stand with me. No one listened." Her tears spilled freely now, dripping onto the worn book. "I lost my scholarship. I lost my future. Since then, I've lived on the streets." She broke down then, pressing the book to her chest as though it were her last piece of life. Her shoulders shook. "All I had left was this book. I kept it because it was proof. Proof that I wasn't nothing. Proof that I once mattered." The silence in the office was heavy, broken only by the sound of her weeping. Richard stood frozen, his throat tight, his heart heavy. He had faced boardrooms full of hard men, contracts worth billions, but this young woman's pain pierced him deeper than any loss. Slowly he stepped closer and sat opposite her. His voice was softer now, no longer the commanding tone of a CEO, but the quiet voice of a man who had known his own share of grief. "Mabel," he said gently, "you're not nothing. Don't ever say that again." She lifted her tear-streaked face, confused. He leaned forward, his eyes steady. 2 years ago, my father died. He built this company with his hands, his sweat, his life. When he was gone, the burden fell on me. I was not ready. I felt like the whole world wanted me to fail. There were nights I sat alone in this very office, wondering if I was strong enough. He drew a shaky breath, blinking back the sting in his eyes. But I was lucky. I still had my mother. Her words, her prayers, they kept me standing. Without her, I don't know where I'd be. His voice softened even more. But you had no one. And still, here you are, saving a company that turned its back on you before it even knew you. Mabel wept quietly, her lips trembling. But in her chest, something long buried flickered. Someone had finally heard her. Someone had finally believed her. Richard leaned back slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. You saved Eagle Tech today, Mabel. But more than that, you've reminded me that strength doesn't always come in fine suits or big titles. Sometimes it comes from a torn book in the hands of someone the world called worthless. Mabel held her bag tighter, unable to speak, only crying softly into the silence. Richard sat quietly for a long moment, watching Mabel's tears fall onto the faded cover of her book. His chest tightened, and finally he spoke in a steady, almost commanding voice. You won't live on the streets again. Mabel's head jerked up. She searched his face, half expecting mockery, half fearing she had misheard. But his eyes were clear, unwavering. Richard pressed the intercom on his desk. Samuel, he called. Within seconds, his personal assistant walked in, tall, neat, with a tablet tucked under his arm. Yes, sir? Find a decent place for her, Richard instructed. Comfortable, warm, somewhere safe. Today. Samuel blinked, surprised, but nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Richard turned back to Mabel. From this moment you have a home, clothes, food, and a position here at Eagle Tech. You saved me more than you know, Mabel. This company was about to crash, and you pulled us back. He leaned forward slightly. This is not charity. It's repayment. You gave me back my company. I'm only giving you back your life. Mabel's lips parted, trembling. The tears she had tried to stop now flowed freely. She pressed both hands against her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. I don't deserve this, she whispered. I don't even know how to thank you. You already did, Richard said gently. That night, Samuel drove her to a small furnished apartment on the island. The bed was soft, the kitchen filled with food, and clean clothes hung in the wardrobe waiting for her. Mabel touched the sheets, the curtains, the fresh soap in the bathroom, and wept again. Only hours before, she had been invisible under a bridge. Now she had a key to her own door. She knelt by the bed, clutching her old book, whispering, Thank you, God. Thank you. The next morning, Mabel dressed in her new clothes, a simple blouse and skirt, and reported to Eagle Tech. Her hair was combed neatly, her steps careful, her heart full of nervous hope. Richard met her in the lobby, his smile calm, reassuring. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Everyone will know who you are now. That morning, in front of his managers and engineers, Richard introduced her. This is Mabel Johnson, he said. The woman who solved the problem we couldn't. She will be working with us from today. There were polite nods, murmurs, some whispers not loud enough to reach her. Not everyone was pleased. She felt it, but she stood straight, holding her head as steady as she could. Then the glass doors at the far end swung open. Heels clicked against the floor, heads turned, and in walked Clara Williams. Tall, elegant, dressed in a designer dress with a bag slung over her arm. Clara moved like she owned the place. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup sharp, her chin tilted high. She glanced at the workers like they were furniture, offering no greeting. The whispers began immediately. Clara had always been proud, arrogant even. The daughter of a wealthy family, she had grown up knowing her parents were close with the Addams family. Everyone assumed it was only a matter of time before Richard and Clara would marry, sealing the union of two powerful houses. Not long ago, Richard had run into her at a high-class gathering. She had wasted no time attaching herself to him, laughing too loudly at his jokes, standing too close and calling him my boyfriend in front of her friends. He had never asked her out, never promised her anything, but she behaved as though their wedding was already planned. And now, as she swept into Eagle Tech, her eyes fell on the sight that stopped her cold. Richard standing beside Mabel. Her steps faltered. Her smile froze. Shock flashed across her face, quickly hardening into fury. Clara's voice rang out, sharp enough to slice through the quiet lobby. Richard, what is she doing here? Her finger pointed at Mabel, her tone dripping with disbelief. "What is she doing standing so close to you?" Mabel's heart jumped into her throat. She gripped her bag tightly, her body stiff, her eyes lowering in shame. Richard turned calmly, but his eyes had changed. "Clara," he said slowly, "this is Mabel Johnson. She works here now, and you will show her respect." Clara's face burned red. She forced a laugh, thin and mocking. "Respect? For her?" She looked Mabel up and down, sneering. "Do you know who she is, Richard?" Her words carried a sharp edge, and Mabel, though silent, felt her chest tighten. She knew what was coming. The air in the lobby grew tight. Clara's eyes burned into Mabel as though she had seen a ghost. For a split second, Mabel saw it too, the flicker of recognition, the shadow of their shared past. Her chest tightened, her palms damp. But Clara recovered quickly, masking her fear with arrogance. She let out a bitter laugh and hooked her arm through Richard's. "Richard," she said sweetly, though her voice shook with anger, "we need to talk. Privately." Without waiting for an answer, she tugged him toward his office. Mabel stood frozen in the lobby, her bag pressed hard against her side. Whispers rolled across the room like a rising tide. She swallowed, her heart racing. Only yesterday she had been given a miracle, a home, a chance, and now Clara of all people, was here. She knew better than anyone that Clara would stop at nothing to drag her down. Inside the office, Clara dropped the sweetness. She whirled around to face Richard, her voice sharp and dripping with scorn. "Are you out of your mind, bringing a lowlife like her into Eagle Tech?" She sneered. "Do you know what she'll do to you? To this company? She'll destroy everything you've built. Kick her out before it's too late." Richard's expression didn't change. He leaned back against his desk, arms folded, his eyes calm but cold. "Clara," he said, his voice even, "don't ever speak about someone who saved me like that." She blinked, caught off guard by his tone. He continued, firmer now. "If it weren't for her, this company would be finished. You weren't in that boardroom. You didn't see what she did. I did. She saved us, and she deserves respect." Clara's lip curled. "Respect? Richard, don't be blind. She's not what she seems. Don't fall for her innocent act. You should listen to me. Everyone knows we're supposed to be together, you and me. The Williams and Adams families. It's always been understood. People are already expecting our wedding." Richard straightened, his gaze sharp as glass. "That's the problem, Clara. People expecting something doesn't make it true. Whatever lies you've told yourself or your friends, it ends here. We have nothing to do with each other. You're not my fiancé, and you have no right to tell me who to hire." Her face flushed crimson. "So you're choosing her over me? Some street girl?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "I'm choosing truth over arrogance. And for the record, you don't get to decide my life." Clara bit her lip hard to hold back the sting of humiliation. Her pride screamed. She forced a brittle smile and said quietly, "I'm only looking out for you, Richard. But you'll regret this." When she stepped out of the office, her heels clicking furiously against the polished floor, her expression had already shifted. She smiled coldly at the passing staff and leaned in close to whisper to one of them. "That girl is a fraud," she hissed. "I know her past. Watch. She won't last here." By the end of the day, whispers had spread like smoke. She cheated her way through school. She was caught stealing. Mabel felt the stares everywhere she walked, the silent judgments pressing down on her shoulders. She sat at her new desk with her textbook beside her, trying to focus, but the knot in her chest grew tighter. Richard, however, stood steady. When the rumors reached his ears, he dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "She solved what none of you could. That's all that matters," he said firmly in a meeting. "If you doubt her, you doubt me." The room fell silent. No one dared to push further. Later that evening, when the offices were quiet and most people had left, Mabel sat at her desk staring at the glowing screen. Her eyes blurred with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. She wiped them quickly when she heard footsteps. Richard stood there, his hands in his pockets. He studied her for a moment before speaking softly. "You heard the whispers?" Mabel nodded slowly, her throat too tight for words. Finally, she whispered, "You don't have to defend me, not after everything. I don't want you to risk your name, your company, because of me." Richard's voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. Mabel, I'm not defending you out of pity. I trust you. I saw what you did. I know who you are, and no lie from the past will change that. Her lips trembled. She lowered her gaze, tears sliding down her cheek. For the first time in years, someone had not only stood by her but chosen her. Clara did not sleep that night. Her pride had been wounded, her ego bruised. Richard had embarrassed her in front of everyone by defending Mabel, a girl she thought she had buried years ago. The more Clara replayed the moment, the more her rage grew. By morning, the whispers she had planted grew louder. Staff gossiped at the water dispenser. Secretaries exchanged glances in the hall. Executives murmured in corners. Clara's words had spread like poison. She was expelled for malpractice. She will leak company secrets. The rumors reached the highest levels of Eagle Tech. By midweek, Richard was summoned to an emergency executive meeting. In the tall glass boardroom, the executives sat stiffly around the table, their voices sharp with disapproval. "Richard," one of them began, "we cannot afford risk. This girl, Mabel, her past is not clean. The whispers say she was expelled, that she is a thief." Another leaned forward, his tone hard. "We cannot have someone like that in Eagle Tech. We're already under pressure from investors. One wrong move and we lose credibility." The words stung, but Richard did not flinch. He slammed his palm lightly against the table. "Enough!" His voice cut through the room like a whip. "I don't believe those rumors, and I will not fire her because of lies whispered in hallways. Mabel has already saved this company once. She has proven her worth. I will get to the bottom of these stories, but until then, she stays." The room fell into uneasy silence. The executives exchanged wary glances, but none dared to push him further. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, Mabel had heard the whispers. Her heart was heavy. She kept her head down, working quietly at her desk. Yet when a sudden technical fault threatened a critical client presentation, she rose to the occasion again. Calmly, she traced the error back to a hidden calculation gap that had stumped the team for hours. She explained it simply, adjusted the numbers, and saved the presentation from disaster. The clients left satisfied, even impressed. That day, even the doubting executives looked at her differently. Some nodded in respect, some even smiled faintly as if to say, perhaps there was more to this girl than they had been told. But not everyone was happy. At the back of the room, a man watched her closely. His jaw tightened as Richard praised her. His name was Francis Adams, Richard's cousin. Francis had always been ambitious, always bitter. He believed he should have been the CEO of Eagle Tech, not Richard. He told himself he was smarter, sharper, more deserving. Seeing Mabel stand beside Richard, receiving admiration and attention, made his blood boil. When Francis noticed Clara's burning dislike for Mabel, a dark thought crossed his mind. That evening, as Clara stormed out of the building, Francis approached her. "You hate her too," he said quietly. Clara spun, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" "Francis Adams," he replied with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Richard's cousin, and someone who knows he doesn't deserve everything he has. We want the same thing, to bring down Mabel Johnson. We work together, and I promise Richard will be all yours." Clara's lips curled into a slow smile. Finally, someone who understands. From that night, an unholy alliance was formed. Clara and Francis, one fueled by jealousy, the other by envy, secretly agreed to destroy Mabel. The following week, Mabel was scheduled to make her first big presentation before the senior board and external partners. It was her chance to prove herself fully. Francis saw his moment. Late at night, when the offices were empty, he slipped into her workspace. He opened her reports, changed figures, moved columns, and tampered with the analysis to make her appear sloppy and careless. When he left, he smirked to himself. This will be her downfall. But Francis underestimated Mabel. On the morning of the presentation, Mabel carried not only her official slides but also her small notebook, filled with her neat, careful notes. As she began her talk, one of the executives interrupted. "These numbers don't add up," he said coldly. "Care to explain?" Whispers began around the table. Francis smiled faintly from his corner seat. Clara's eyes glowed with satisfaction. Mabel's hands trembled for a second, but then she opened her notebook. "Sir," she said calmly, "these are my handwritten calculations.
If you compare them, you'll see the numbers in this file were altered. But here, she showed her notes, her handwriting neat and clear. The correct balance is here. The projections align perfectly. The room went silent. The executives checked. She was right. Francis's smile vanished. Clara's jaw tightened. Richard leaned forward, his voice sharp. Thank you, Mabel. That clarity is what we need. He looked around the room. Let this be a lesson. Lies may walk fast, but truth runs farther. Applause followed. Mabel exhaled, her chest rising with relief. She had survived another storm.
Francis clenched his fists under the table. His plan had failed. But in his heart, his envy only deepened. He would not stop. The failed sabotage attempt left Francis restless, but for Richard it had the opposite effect. Each day he found himself relying more and more on Mabel. They worked late nights together, bent over files and simulations, her small notebook always open beside her. She explained things with clarity that cut through confusion, and Richard, though he was the CEO, often found himself listening, learning, even laughing with her in ways he hadn't with anyone in years. Clara noticed. Every time she saw them walking through the halls side by side, every time she caught Richard smiling at Mabel's words, a new fire of jealousy burned in her chest. She couldn't hold it in any longer. One afternoon, she cornered him outside his office, her arms folded, her chin high, her voice sharp. It's her or me, Richard, she declared. Richard blinked, taken aback. What? You heard me, Clara snapped. That girl, Mabel, she's ruining everything. She's coming between us. Either you send her away or I'm done. Richard sighed heavily, his patience thinning. Clara, stop being paranoid. There is no us. There never was. You and I, we have nothing to do with each other. Whatever lies you've told yourself, let them go. Her face flushed red. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. You'll regret this, Richard. Then she turned on her heels and stormed off, her heels echoing angrily across the marble floor. That night, Mabel stayed behind after most of the staff had left. She sat in the quiet office, adjusting numbers on a project. Her desk lamp cast a warm glow, highlighting the tired but determined look on her face. The sound of footsteps broke the silence. Richard walked in, his tie loosened, a faint smile playing on his lips. You're still here, he said softly. Mabel looked up, surprised. I wanted to finish this before tomorrow. Richard walked over and sat beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he leaned back in his chair. Tell me something, Mabel. Something about you, not work, not numbers. Just you. She hesitated, then gave a small smile. I like simple things. Reading, walking in quiet places. I used to love watching airplanes take off when I was little. It made me feel like the world was bigger than my problems. Richard chuckled. Airplanes, huh? Fitting. She tilted her head. What about you? He thought for a moment. I like music. Old records my dad used to play. They remind me of him. The mood grew softer, the silence between them warmer. Their laughter faded, and the space grew still. Then Richard asked quietly, Mabel, was Clara really your course mate? Mabel's smile froze. She looked away. Yes, I was accused of malpractice. Well, Clara, she was the one who accused me. The theft, the exam malpractice, all of it came from her. I tried to defend myself, but no one listened. Her father was powerful. I didn't stand a chance. Richard sat back, the pieces fitting together at last. Clara's hatred, her desperate attempts to push Mabel out, the constant rumors, it was all connected. Of course. The truth settled in him like a stone. He looked at Mabel with new eyes, not just as the girl who saved his company, but as someone who had endured years of injustice at the hands of the same woman now pretending to be his future. The silence stretched. Their eyes met, lingering. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile and strong at once. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world outside had disappeared. Richard leaned slightly closer. Mabel's breath caught. For a moment, their faces hovered just an inch apart. Then, panicking, Mabel shot to her feet, her cheeks burning. I should go, she stammered, grabbing her bag. She hurried out of the office before he could say anything. Richard sat there for a moment, then slowly smiled to himself. She was running from it, but he wasn't blind. Something was growing between them.
Something real. He reached for his phone and called Samuel. "Samuel," he said, his voice firm now. "Look into Mabel Johnson's expulsion. I want the full truth, and check Clara's name while you're at it. I want to know exactly what happened back then." When he ended the call, he leaned back in his chair, his thoughts racing. If what he suspected was true, then Clara's lies had destroyed Mabel's life, and it was time the truth came out. The night after Richard's call, Samuel sat at his desk, papers spread across every corner. He wasn't just an assistant. He was Richard's right hand, sharp and relentless when it came to uncovering the truth. His fingers tapped the keyboard quickly as he searched old-school records, scholarship logs, and archived news articles. Piece by piece, the picture came together. Mabel had entered university on a full scholarship, her brilliance undeniable. Her professors' notes praised her as one of the finest students they had ever seen. Then, almost overnight, her world collapsed. A report surfaced accusing her of stealing test papers and cheating during exams. Samuel frowned as he dug deeper. The testimonies were vague, the evidence flimsy, but one thing was consistent. Every record tied back to Clara Williams, the wealthy donor's daughter. Samuel leaned back, rubbing his temples. It's all there, he thought. She was framed, and Clara orchestrated it. He sent Richard a late-night message. "We're close. The truth is darker than we thought." Meanwhile, across town, Clara and Francis sat in a dimly lit restaurant, their voices low but laced with venom. "He's digging," Clara hissed. "Richard is looking into the past. If he finds out the truth, I'll lose everything. He'll never forgive me." Francis sipped his drink, his eyes narrowing. "Then we don't give him the chance. We make her leave Eagle Tech before Richard can choose her over you." Clara smirked bitterly. "And how do you plan to do that? She's too stubborn." Francis leaned forward. "Then we scare her, remind her, tell her she isn't safe here. If she values her life, she'll run." The next evening, Mabel walked home from work. She carried her worn bag over her shoulder, the night air cool against her skin. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. Richard trusted her. Samuel had been kind, and maybe, just maybe, her life was beginning to heal. But as she turned down a quiet street, shadows moved. 3 men stepped out from the alley, their faces half hidden by caps. One held a thick rod, another a chain that clinked softly as it swung. "Good evening, madam," the tallest one sneered. "You're Mabel Johnson, eh? The rising star of Eagle Tech?" Mabel froze. What do you want?" They circled her like wolves. "A message," one spat. "Leave Eagle Tech. Walk away if you love your life. This is your only warning." Before she could reply, the rod came down across her arm. Pain shot through her body. She stumbled, clutching her bag to her chest. The second man shoved her hard and she fell against the pavement, the taste of blood in her mouth. Her phone slipped from her bag. With trembling hands, she dialed the only number she trusted. Richard," she whispered, her voice weak and breaking. "Please, help." The line went dead as her body gave in and she fainted. Minutes later, Richard's car screeched to a halt at the end of the street. He jumped out, his heart pounding. His eyes fell on her crumpled body lying on the pavement. "Mabel!" he cried, rushing to her side. He lifted her carefully into his arms, his chest burning with fury. Blood stained his shirt as he held her close. He shouted at his driver, "Hospital, now!" Inside the car, Mabel stirred weakly. They told me to leave Eagle Tech," she murmured. "They said I'd die if I stayed." Richard's jaw tightened, his face dark with rage. "Who?" But she had already slipped back into unconsciousness. Richard held her tighter, his voice low and trembling with fury. "Clara, what have you done?" The fluorescent lights of the hospital flickered above as Richard paced the corridor, his shirt still stained with Mabel's blood. Every second felt like a hammer in his chest. Through the glass, he could see doctors moving around her bed, checking her wounds, stitching where the blows had cut deep. When at last the doctor stepped out, Richard rushed forward. "Is she okay?" "She's lucky," the doctor said firmly. "The injuries are not life-threatening. A few days' rest and she will recover." Relief crashed over Richard like a wave. He nodded, whispered a quick thank you, and hurried into the room. Mabel lay against the pillows, her face pale but her eyes open. When she saw him, a weak smile tugged at her lips. "You came," she whispered.
Richard took her hand, careful not to hurt her. "I'll always come. No one will ever touch you again, Mabel. I swear it." His voice trembled with a mix of fury and love. Before she could reply, Samuel arrived, a file clutched in his hand. His face was grave. "Sir, you need to see this." Richard took the file and scanned the pages quickly. His jaw clenched tighter with every line. Evidence, witness statements, old letters. Every thread led back to one name: Clara Williams. She had orchestrated Mabel's downfall at university, paying others to lie, planting stolen notes, and leveraging her father's influence to bury the truth. Samuel had tied it all together. Richard's chest heaved with anger. "So it's true," he said through gritted teeth. "She destroyed your life, and now she tried to destroy you again." Mabel closed her eyes as tears slid down her cheeks. "I told myself no one would ever believe me." Richard leaned closer, his voice soft now. "I believe you. I've always believed you. And I promise you this, Mabel. Clara and anyone who touched your life with lies will pay for it." Her hand squeezed his weakly. "Richard, thank you for standing by me when no one else did." He shook his head. "No, Mabel. You didn't just save my company. You saved me." He paused, his voice low but steady. "I love you." Mabel's lips parted, her breath catching. For a long moment she stared at him, disbelief and joy colliding in her chest. Then, with tears still streaming, she whispered back, "I love you too." Richard bent and pressed his forehead to hers. In that hospital room, amidst the beeping machines and the faint smell of antiseptic, two broken souls finally found each other. The next day, Richard insisted on taking her to his mansion, a sprawling estate on the edge of Banana Island. Madame Ruth, his mother, met them at the door, her kind but sharp eyes immediately softening when she saw Mabel's bandaged arm. "This must be the young woman you've spoken so much about," Madame Ruth said warmly, drawing Mabel into a gentle embrace. "Welcome, my dear. Thank you for making my son look towards love. I thought he would never bring any woman home." Later, in the quiet of the study, Madame Ruth handed her son a brown folder. "Your father was investigating this before the accident," she said softly. "No one ever suspected I would investigate it because they assumed I stayed out of company affairs. But I kept it, and did some extra digging. I found out some things I want you to see." Richard took the file, his hands trembling. Inside were documents linking board members, shady deals, and names he had trusted. His father had uncovered rot at the very heart of Eagle Tech before his untimely death. Tears slipped from Richard's eyes as he closed the file. He was trying to protect this company. He died before he could finish it. This shows he was poisoned. We all thought his sudden heart attack was an accident. Mabel stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm. "That is so sad to know, Richard. But it also means you will have to finish what he started, so he can rest in peace." Richard's voice hardened, his grief sharpening into resolve. "I will. Everyone involved will face justice. I swear it." Outside the mansion, the night was quiet. But inside, a storm was gathering. Richard knew the battles ahead would not only expose Clara and Francis, but also shake Eagle Tech to its foundations. And this time, he would not be fighting alone. The days that followed were heavy with tension. Richard moved quietly, meeting only with Samuel and a few trusted auditors as they combed through the thick file his mother had given him. Each page seemed to peel away another mask. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Francis, his own cousin, had been feeding on the company from the inside. Contracts rerouted, fake vendors, ghost accounts. Worse still, logs showed Francis tampering with Eagle Tech projects, deliberately planting errors to embarrass Richard. Whispers began to spread in the corridors of Eagle Tech. Staff who once looked up to Francis started to avoid his gaze. The air shifted. His charm no longer carried weight. Suspicion had moved in. Then came the night when investigators handed Richard the proof. Links between Francis and the very thugs who had attacked Mabel, phone calls traced, payments confirmed. Richard didn't hesitate. The next morning, police officers walked into Eagle Tech's gleaming lobby. Employees froze as Francis, dressed in his expensive suit, was led out in handcuffs. His eyes burned with rage as he spat, "You'll regret this, Richard." The trial that followed, gripped the city. Reporters filled the courtroom, cameras flashing as the Adams family name once again became headline news. Francis stood tall, but his voice shook with bitterness. "You replaced me with a street beggar girl," he shouted, pointing at Mabel. "I deserve to be CEO, not you. You're only here because your father owned this company. Everyone knows I am more deserving." The courtroom buzzed. All eyes turned to Mabel. She sat calmly, her simple dress and bandaged arm a stark contrast to Francis's polished arrogance. Her voice was steady as she rose to speak. "I didn't take your place, Francis," she said softly. "I only used the gift I refused to bury. What you lost wasn't stolen. It was poisoned by your own envy." Her words silenced the room. Even the judge looked at her with quiet respect. Richard stood next, his presence commanding the space. His voice was firm, every word like a nail hammered into the coffin of lies. "This company was never yours to begin with, Francis. You didn't build it. You tried to bleed it dry." He opened a folder and placed document after document before the court. Records of fraud, evidence of money laundering, signed contracts under shell companies. Francis's face drained of color. He stammered, but Richard wasn't finished. "And the most damning," Richard continued, his voice low, "is this testimony." The doors opened, and a frail man was brought forward under police escort. His eyes darted nervously as he spoke. I was paid by Francis Adams to slip poison into Mr. Adams's tea 2 years ago. I did it. And I am ready to confess." Gasps rippled through the room. Madame Ruth covered her mouth. How could someone do this to his own uncle, tears spilling silently? Francis's composure shattered. "Lies!" he screamed. "All lies!" But his voice cracked, his mask gone. The judge's gavel struck. The verdict was swift. "Francis Adam, this court finds you guilty of attempted sabotage, fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of Mr. Adams. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but Mabel felt only a deep stillness. Justice, long delayed, had finally spoken. Clara sat at the back, pale as chalk, her head bent low. Her name had been dragged through the mud, her plotting, her jealousy, her cruelty, all laid bare in the papers. The friends she once bragged to now avoided her like the plague. For the first time, Clara Williams tasted the sharp bitterness of her own downfall. Richard took Mabel's hand as they stepped out into the sunlight. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but for him, there was only her. "It's over. I cannot believe Richard will go that far for money," he said silently. Mabel squeezed his hand gently. "Yes, Richard, it's over, and now it's time to find real closure." A few days later, the press hall at Eagle Tech's headquarters was packed to the brim. Cameras lined the front row, microphones crowded the podium, and journalists jostled for position. The air hummed with curiosity. For weeks, whispers had filled the city about the mysterious young woman who had saved Eagle Tech from collapse. Today, the billionaire CEO himself was finally ready to speak. Richard Adams stood tall at the podium, his face calm but resolute. Behind him, the Eagle Tech banner gleamed. At his side sat Mabel Johnson, dressed elegantly, her hands folded nervously on her lap. When the noise settled, Richard began. His voice was steady, carrying both authority and conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Eagle Tech faced the greatest crisis in its history. Our company was on the brink of losing everything until a brilliant mind stepped in with the solution that saved us. That person is sitting beside me today. Her name is Mabel Johnson." The room exploded in camera flashes. Reporters leaned forward, murmurs buzzing like a hive. Richard raised his hand for silence. But Mabel's story is not just about saving Eagle Tech, it is about truth. Years ago, she was a top engineering student, brilliant and promising, yet she was falsely accused of theft and malpractice. Today, I present the evidence we uncovered, proof of bribery, collusion, and corruption among those who destroyed her future. He lifted a folder and placed the documents on the table. Screens behind him lit up with copies of signed bribe receipts, emails, and statements from witnesses who had come forward. Professors, exam officials, and even a dean, whose names once respected, were exposed. Gasps filled the room. Journalists scribbled furiously. Richard's eyes darkened as he continued. Mabel was innocent. She was framed because of jealousy. Her life was torn apart by lies, but today the truth is here and the world will know who she really is, a woman of brilliance, resilience, and integrity. He turned toward her, his gaze softening. This woman saved not only my company but my life. I owe her more than I can ever repay. Mabel, trembling, leaned into the microphone. Her voice cracked but carried strength. For years I thought my voice didn't matter. I thought I was nobody, but all I had left was this book. She held up her old, torn engineering textbook, and the hope that one day truth would find me again. And it has. The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Across town, Clara sat frozen in her living room, watching the broadcast. Her face was pale as the evidence splashed across the screen. The truth she had buried years ago was alive and shouting. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages from friends and society contacts. But when she answered, it wasn't support. It was condemnation. Her parents stormed into the room, faces twisted with shame. "Clara," her father thundered, "all because of your jealousy. Do you see what you've done? You've destroyed not only yourself but our family's name." Clara covered her face with her hands, trembling. She had thought her secrets would remain buried forever. But now, she was publicly ruined. Invitations withdrawn, contracts cut, her name blacklisted in every social circle that once adored her. By evening, the newspapers carried one story above all others. From homeless to hero, young woman falsely accused saves billionaire's company. Photos of Mabel holding her torn book at the press conference filled the front pages. Social media buzzed with her story. Students called her an inspiration. Mothers told their children about her resilience. She had become more than a survivor. She was a national symbol. And in the mansion that night, as Richard watched the headlines roll in, he turned to Mabel and whispered, "The world finally sees who you are, but to me you've always been this woman." Tears filled her eyes as she leaned against him. For the first time in years, she felt not just seen, but celebrated. The following day, the sun was warm as Mabel stepped out of the glass doors of Eagle Tech. She carried a folder under her arm, her heart still light from the whirlwind of change her life had taken. Reporters no longer crowded the gates. Today was calm, almost peaceful. But as she walked toward the street, a familiar figure appeared, trembling and waiting. It was her aunt. "Mabel," the woman called softly, her voice breaking. She looked smaller than Mabel remembered, her once sharp face lined with regret. Mabel froze. Her chest tightened. Her aunt hurried closer, tears glistening. "I saw you on the news. The whole country is talking about you. My child, please forgive me. I was blind. I didn't see you. I didn't believe you. I should have stood by you when the world turned against you." The words cracked Mabel's heart wide open. She stared at the woman who had once been her only family. Memories rushed back, the cold nights she was thrown out, the harsh words that cut deeper than hunger, the constant reminder that she was just a freeloader, a burden. Her voice shook as she answered, "Yes, you took me in after my parents died. But you never let me forget that I was unwanted. Every day you called me an orphaned leech. When I got that scholarship, it was my second chance. I thought maybe I could finally make you proud. But when Clara's lies ruined me, you didn't even look at me twice. You didn't believe me. You threw me away, the only family I had." Her aunt sobbed openly. "I know. I was cruel. I was wrong. Please forgive me." Mabel closed her eyes. For years she had carried that wound like a stone inside her chest. Now, looking at the broken woman before her, she felt the weight shift. "I forgive you," she whispered. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to what we were. You're not part of my life anymore. That door is closed." Her aunt nodded slowly, tears streaming, and turned away. Mabel stood still, her heart heavy but freer than it had ever been. That evening, Richard picked her up with a smile that softened all the scars of the day. "I have something planned," he said, refusing to say more. They went to a quiet cinema, slipping into the back row. For 2 hours they laughed, shared popcorn, whispered little jokes in the dark. Afterward, He took her on a boat cruise across the lagoon, the city lights shimmering like stars fallen into water. As the boat glided gently, Richard stood, his eyes never leaving hers. He held out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. "Mabel Johnson," he said softly, "when no one believed in you, you still chose to believe in yourself. And when no one stood with me, you saved me. You saved Eagle Tech. You saved my heart. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hand to her lips, her whole body trembling. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him. "Richard," she said against his chest, "you were the only one who believed me when the world turned its back. I will never forget that." He lifted her face, and their lips met in a passionate kiss, the kind that sealed not just love, but a promise of forever. Later that night, back at his mansion, Mabel stood on the wide balcony, looking out over the glittering city. In her hands was a stack of letters, admission offers from top universities. Her eyes filled with wonder. Once, she had slept under bridges with nothing but a torn book to remind her of who she was. Now the world was opening its doors again. She whispered into the night air, her voice full of gratitude. Second chances, opportunities when all hope is lost, and finding true love at your weakest point. That's what saved me. I never thought I could be this happy. Behind her, Richard walked onto the balcony. He slid his arm around her waist, his warmth steady against the night breeze. Together, they turned and stepped inside. A new chapter was beginning.